She needed sutures when the teachers hurriedly drove her to the hospital. It's safe to say that my wife lost it. She broke down in tears and became hysterical. The stitches will come out quickly, and our daughter is well, but my wife is not handling it well. My wife became very upset with the boys' parents when they came to visit us and apologized in person. The child, an 8-year-old who appeared scared, was with them. She began threatening to obtain restraining orders and file a lawsuit for damages. I don't know where all of those ideas originated. The parents were taken aback. I gave them a brief apology and sent them on their way. My wife was talking nonstop about suing them. She continued by discussing taking the children out of school to homeschool them. Considering all the school shootings she has been reading about across the nation, she believes that is the safest option. She would not stop talking about how harmful and pointless school was. I did something after that I'm not proud of. I screamed at her. I was enraged, irritated, and frustrated. I simply let go of years' worth of resentment. For a split second, I believe I forgot she was even carrying my child. Tears filled her eyes as she gave me one last look and turned to leave. Almost a week has passed and none of us has made an attempt to communicate or offer an apology to the other. Our discussion is limited to matters pertaining to the children. I firmly refuse to have the children taken out of school. They ought to have a traditional upbringing and a regular school life with pals. My wife gets very protective of them, so I'm not going to take that away from them. I'm not sure how to approach this. Our life is wonderful except for this one problem. Honestly, she's the most amazing woman I've ever encountered. She loves me like crazy, and I feel the same way about her. The portion before the children is the funniest. My spouse was a very bashful individual. She avoided conflict and detested confrontation. Her shyness made it difficult for her to make friends. But after she became a mother, everything changed. As the father of our children and her spouse, I must admit that at first, I found it amazing to witness how a meek and timid woman could become fierce and loud when it came to her child. But even our kids are starting to feel overwhelmed by her current love obsession with our children. My daughter is already beginning to suffocate from it. Her constant need to have the last word when it comes to decisions. Involving the kids is straining our relationship. I want to be treated equally when it comes to our children's affairs and not be painted as a villain just because I disagree with her. I'm terrified right now because we have another one coming. I've already scheduled a vasectomy appointment with the doctor. Our third one is over, thank you. I already fear what she will be like with the new baby boy. I've already started researching therapy, but persuading her will be challenging. Is there anything else I can do to help her feel less stressed about the kids? I detest seeing our relationship fall apart in this way. Remarks to which Theop has responded. Before you had a second child, let alone a third, you need to have found a solution to this. Your wife will completely ruin your children's capacity to function in the real world, and she is in serious need of rehabilitation. Whoa. With our children, I will never have to worry about my wife physically abusing them. When they tumble to the ground and injure their knee, she becomes terrified. She can't bear the sharp needles penetrating them. Thus, she's far too delicate to see them receive their immunizations. I don't think she will harm them physically. More worrying to me is the likelihood that she will mentally exhaust our kids. You need to go talk to your doctor about this. You should have done so as soon as the first child was born, and she began acting out. However, you need to act. Now you are already seeing the effects on your daughter, and this will only worsen and negatively affect the mental health of your children. Your wife's unreasonable behavior is emotionally abusive to your children. Call your doctor right away. Oop, I really am. I am fully aware that we should no longer take this casually. As one of the commenters mentioned, I'm scheduling a meeting with a marriage counselor so that she won't think I'm insane for advising her to see a therapist straight away. I'll speak with the counselor to make a therapeutic referral for her. I'm not going to be obstinate about this anymore. I firmly recommend that she be given a PPA evaluation. Before she does something irreversible to those kids, she has to have some severe therapy yesterday. Right now, there's no negotiating on it. Oh my, after reading through all the comments, I checked into PPA. Having a term for what I've been seeing for years feels such relief. All of the symptoms match what I have observed in her over the years. If I were to sum it up, she has severe PEP, which prevents her from interacting normally with a newborn. Was there ever a time you told her she could trust you? For myself, there are moments when I feel compelled to speak out in order to assist bring something from just inside my thoughts into reality. It's merely an idea about what could make her feel less anxious. Many of those same feelings have come up for me during my pregnancies. Okay, I'll attempt to try to show her that I'm someone she can trust more. Words of affirmation, in my opinion, greatly assist her. All I hope is that she finds me credible. September 17th, 2023, an update. Hi to all of you. A month ago, I wrote on Reddit about how my wife's extreme overprotectiveness of our children was negatively impacting our marriage. To all of that, this is an update. Please note that some readers may find some of the content discussed at the end of this piece. Setting. Alright, the update did too. Things happened would be an understatement. 2 days after I put the piece online, my wife discovered it on my phone. One night when she woke up, she saw that our youngest child had a small fever. It's not a deal breaker for either of us, but I believe that initially she thought I was having an affair or something. As a result, she swiftly searched through my phone while I was asleep. We are able to access each other's phones at any time and own each other's passwords. Simply said, I was far too foolish and neglected to disable the Reddit notice. That evening, my spouse read the entire post and all of the comments. The following morning, I awoke early and discovered my spouse was not in bed. Given my son's illness, I figured she would be with him. My wife wasn't in his room when I checked on him, but he seemed fine. I looked around the house and there she was, sitting in total darkness in the main room. She appeared to be a live ghost as I turned on the lights. She didn't seem to know where she was, and her face was marred by tears. I ran to her out of fear for my life. My heart fell out of my chest when I realized she had my phone. She refused to budge when I tried to get her to talk. I am a threat to them? She finally said, meeting my gaze after I had been trying to get her to talk for a long time. It pained to hear her in that state, her voice broken. I had no idea what to say to her. They threatened to kill me. It was terrible to watch her like that, like though she was hyperventilating. She yelled at me to leave her alone and stared blankly for a considerable amount of time without answering. The kids got up since they had school, and they went to look for my wife, as they did every morning. My wife felt as though she was witnessing a ghost when she noticed the children attempting to approach her. With a horrified expression, she rose from the sofa and hurriedly made her way to our room, closing herself inside. The kids were afraid and perplexed. I so promised them that I would let them skip school, and that I would drop them off at their grandparents today. With great excitement, they hurried out to prepare. After some time, my daughter approached me and inquired about her mother's situation. That tiny one is intuitive. I clarified that her mother merely had a minor illness and required some time to recover. She advised me to give my mother a hug when she starts to weep, because it helps. It broke my heart to learn that I was unaware that my wife's anxiety attacks had been witnessed by my kid. Before returning home, I dropped the kids off at their grandparents'. After reading all of the reviews, I made an appointment with the therapist for that very week. When I returned home, my spouse would not even move, eat, or converse with me. I was a little afraid she may attempt self-harm. However, she never takes any action that would endanger herself when she is expecting. That's something I've observed. When I told her that I had dropped the kids off at her parents' place, she asked me where the kids were, and I could see her struggling to hide her unhappiness. However, it seems that the remarks were still vivid in her memory, so she attempted to argue with me about it. Things weren't easy for nearly a week. I requested her mother to assist in explaining the issue as I prolonged the kids' stay with their grandparents. They dropped the kids off at school every day and were very supportive. I told my wife that I was taking her to therapy. Despite being exhausted and lacking sleep, she refused to accept assistance from anyone, including me, with our child. She seldom slept for days at a time, until she dozed off for over 6 hours. I wanted her to get some good sleep and take care of our baby on her own, so I didn't wake her up. I changed her diapers, fed her the milk bottle Laura had pumped, and other things. Upon awakening, Laura experienced a complete meltdown, accusing me of being a bad person for essentially allowing her to sleep, and herself of being a bad mother for not being up to tend to our child. Even I was becoming annoyed and overwhelmed at this point. After putting our daughter to bed and closing the door, I sit her down and we have a lengthy conversation that ends in a fight. She broke down in tears and said she was afraid something would happen to. Took her to her parents' house. We had breakfast together, but my wife shied away from them like the plague, only catching a glimpse. This was the longest our son had been apart from her since he was born, so he did his best to wriggle into her arms because he missed her. But when he attempted to do so, my wife began to experience panic attacks, which in turn caused him pain. It was a horrible week. When she was at home, I made extra time for our kids to make sure they understood how much she loved them and how much we loved them too. I informed them that my mother was ill, in need of assistance, and that I was doing everything in my power to ensure her recovery. 2 weeks or so later, I brought the kids back home. By then, my wife had attended over 5 sessions, and although it wasn't all sunshine and butterflies, she had resumed conversation with the kids. However, she kept her distance at all times. I was the main caregiver from now on. Since she is far more knowledgeable about them than I am, she would always be there to give me advice. She was conversing with her mother and me once more. It was somewhat improved. She informed me she needed to talk to me when she returned home from one of her sessions about a week ago. After I put the kids to bed, we talked alone in our room. My wife told me that although she had always intended to tell me this, she had never gotten around to it. However, after going through therapy sessions with the doctor, she eventually came to the realization that it was unfair of her to withhold something like this from me. As I said in my earlier essay, I suspected that something that happened to her during her first pregnancy changed her perspective on things. I was correct too. 9 years ago, in or around her 24th week, my wife met someone. It's incredible how one event altered every aspect of our lives. After becoming pregnant, my wife left her part-time work at a diner and continued to attend university. However, because the diner is only a short walk from her classes, my wife continues to frequent it to complete her homework and other assignments when she is not in class. My wife needed to use the restroom on a day similar to that when she was in the diner. As she entered the women's restroom, she heard grunts and other unpleasant sounds. Coming from someone? It appeared to be a woman who was writhing in pain. My spouse approached the woman in the stall and inquired if she required assistance. After some hesitation, the woman opened the door to accept the assistance that was being provided. The woman was miscarrying, it turned out. She was about 17 weeks pregnant and a middle-aged woman. Even though my wife was shocked at the time, she didn't think twice about going down to try to aid the woman. The female was leaking blood into the bathroom. The woman begged my wife to catch the fetus once she noticed she was pushing it out and wanted to bury the baby properly rather than just throw it away. My wife had tried to assist her relax. My spouse described how holding the fetus in her palm made her feel like she was about to die. He was all bloody and about the size of her hand, she explained. Since the mother was still bleeding, she helped her back up on her feet and wrapped the baby in some extra cloth. She took the woman to the hospital where she was treated by medical professionals. My spouse spent the entire day with the woman. About halfway through, the woman lost consciousness. When she regained consciousness, my wife sat by her side to provide moral support. The woman told my wife her story around this time. She gave an explanation of her boyfriend's abuse. She had been hit by him earlier that day, and although she was able to get away, her stomach had been severely injured. When the discomfort got too much, she entered the first eatery she spotted. The woman informed her that she was losing her second child. She had apparently given her boyfriend custody of her 4- and 7-year-old daughters when she went to work around a year prior. But he was too preoccupied with throwing the party to see them. The 4-year-old saw a cat while she was playing outside and fled into the street. The toddler was hit by a fast car and instantly perished. Hearing how another man could be so thoughtless about his child made my blood boil. How she continued to be with that man for another year after is beyond me. What a pitiful human being's justification. No one could take better care of a child than a mother, the woman informed my wife. She advised her to never put her trust in anybody else when it comes to her kids, because nobody works as hard as she does to make sure they are safe. After that day, my wife has never seen her again, but the encounter changed the chemistry of her brain to the point where she began to see everyone and everything as a threat to our kids. Everything made sense as to why she was pregnant and walked with such caution. I mean, I can't even begin to picture the feeling of holding a dead fetus in your hands. It makes sense that she would steer clear of any situation that could result in it. Explained why she could never rely on anyone else to look after the children. I think she trusted me with them because she knew in her heart that I couldn't harm her or the children, and because she loved me. What it must have been like to have to deliver a miscarried baby while in your second trimester is beyond my comprehension. Every time I consider her, my heart aches for her. The way that one day drastically altered our life seems frustrating. My spouse confided in me that our kids are her everything and that she lives for them. She did, however, add that she is prepared to acknowledge that kids are independent human beings who must develop independently of her. Although she doesn't say she understands yet, I know. She needs more time. As of right now, some of her attitude changes seem to have benefited somewhat from the sessions. If she keeps doing this, maybe things will turn around for the better. Years of trauma-related habits need to be unlearned by her. They must require time. Her therapist seems optimistic about her ability to cure my wife, and she provides me with regular reports on her status. Thus, perhaps it's not that horrible. After the baby is here, the doctor has advised my wife to start taking anxiety and stress drugs. She has 1 week to go. I'm still anxious about the whole situation involving baby number 3. I won't allow a new baby to prevent her from going to therapy, though. For the sake of our children and for her own sake, I'm going to make sure she keeps going. To spend more time with my family, I really deleted Reddit a while ago. I just recently realized that this original Shadow Babin post was made more than a month ago when I returned to Reddit. To be honest, I became a little afraid when I noticed the plethora of comments accusing me of lying and claiming that this was all a lie. Naturally, everyone doesn't believe anyone on Reddit, and I can understand why. I appreciate your warm words. Reading a positive one in the midst of all the others was refreshing. A few weeks ago, my wife gave birth to a healthy boy. She's continuing in treatment, and after the last 2 visits, I'm starting to notice subtle shifts in her attitude toward our newborn. I had a vasectomy because that's what I wanted to do, and I like what everyone else said. After a while, my wife warmed up to the concept. This time, I'm giving her more care to make sure she's not feeling overburdened in any way. And since it took me a long time to realize that something like that had happened, I completely see why some people believe the incident with the woman is fictitious. But miscarriages happen frequently and in different locations. My wife helped a woman in need when she happened to be there. I'm not sure what makes it seem so unbelievable. However, my purpose is not to persuade people of the truth. When I learned more about my wife's situation, I just wanted to provide an update. Our marriage is failing because our wife turned into an overly protective parent who wouldn't let anyone approach our children. I've been with my wife, Laura, for 14 years, and we've been married for 9. We experienced everything together as a couple since high school. Fortunately, we overcame the likelihood of high school romances ending and were able to tie the knot at the age of 20. While she worked part-time to pay for our costs, I enrolled in university. We were appreciative since my parents had covered the cost of my undergraduate education and her parents had assisted us in renting an apartment, preventing us from having too much debt or other financial commitments. When I was in college, we had a tiny wedding that was attended only by our immediate relatives. We found out she was pregnant a few months after our wedding. It goes without saying that we weren't happy. Before we decided to start a family, our original plan was for me to graduate from college and get employment, allowing her to return to school and finish her degree. No, we weren't being careless before everyone starts screaming at me. We employed defense. She was using birth control, and I occasionally used condoms as an added measure of protection. No amount of birth control could stop our baby daughter from kicking our asses when she came into the world because she was a force to be reckoned with. Laura wasn't as ecstatic in the early weeks of her pregnancy. I did tell her I would be there for her no matter what, and I did use the A word once. She cut me off right away, stating it was not an option because she comes from a very devout household. It took us 2 years into the relationship before we even had sex. Only after I asked her to marry me and became engaged to her, maybe in the 4th month, were we permitted to move in together. After learning the gender, I watched my wife gradually come to terms with the fact that she was carrying a live human being, and at nearly 18 weeks, she experienced the baby's first movement in her womb. Thinking about it, there was a difference right away. Looking back, I see that it was all there from her very first pregnancy, even though I wasn't aware of it at the time. She had applied to and been accepted into an accounting school before we found out she was pregnant, and by then I had secured employment. Despite being pregnant, she had enrolled in classes and continued to attend them. Around week 30, when she kept taking a few sick days even though she wasn't unwell, I became aware of her reluctance. When I challenged her about it, she sobbed and told me that she didn't want to go to college while pregnant because everyone could see that she was indeed pregnant and her stomach was growing larger. I initially assumed she was ashamed of being pregnant at such a young age in front of her peers. However, after speaking with her more, I understood that she wasn't ashamed. Instead, she feared that someone might attempt to harm her. She was scared of sliding, falling down the stairs, eating something she shouldn't have, accidentally consuming alcohol, etc. Like everyone else, I was perplexed and believed her anxieties were irrationally excessive. Why would someone attempt to intentionally harm a lady who is expecting? She only shook her head no when I asked whether she thought someone was threatening her. She pleaded with me to allow her to go briefly, until the child was old enough to be left in daycare or assigned to a nanny. She assured me that she will carry on with her studies after. After a few more months, she gives birth to our gorgeous daughter. My wife and I fell in love with her right away. My wife hardly left the house during the last few months of her pregnancy and then, just to go to doctor's visits. I gave her mother a call and asked her to spend some time with my wife so she wouldn't be by herself all day. Although my wife didn't particularly enjoy the idea, she did like the fact that her mother would assist her and spare her from having to perform labor-intensive household tasks. The worst part came after delivery. My wife refused to have any assistance with the infant. Our little girl is the first grandchild on both sides of our family because my wife and I are the eldest. Everyone was giddy with anticipation for her arrival, but my wife was so conflicted and uncomfortable with anyone holding our kid that it began to irritate everyone. Before long, everyone was chatting behind her back. She was a new mother who needed her space, so I did my best to support her and requested all of our relatives to give us some space. Nobody was allowed to assist Laura with our daughter. She seldom allowed me to look after my own child. Our child, if she wasn't around to look after her. She had read of situations in which newborns had died unexpectedly or while in the care of someone other than their mother. I was unsure if this was typical or not. I dismissed it at the time as a mother worrying about her child. I've heard that hormones are all over the place in new mothers. I informed her that while I respected her desire to keep me away from our child, she didn't have the authority to do so. I clarified that the two of us would be raising our child together, not just her. She slightly relaxed her relationship with me so. Regardless of what she said, because I had scheduled a session. Throughout the entire week, she only disagreed with me on this one issue. It was so hard to find her sobbing herself to sleep every night, to be really honest. When I arrived back from work, I occasionally found her talking to herself because she had sporadic panic attacks. She began attending treatment, but nothing seemed to change throughout the first several sessions. She merely remained silent. Work wasn't a problem because she was on maternity leave. I could feel her suffocating not to see the kids, and I knew she was too torn between her feelings to ask me to take her to see them, so every other day that I could take care of our child and give her enough time to have a good night's sleep. As our daughter got older, I made an effort to persuade her to return to college, pointing out that we could either drop our daughter off at daycare or ask a grandparent to watch her while she was in school. She promptly disregarded the suggestion, stating that our toddler daughter was in a very vital stage of life since she would soon begin to recall memories. She insisted that she would never allow her daughter to fall in love with someone else, saying that it was her job and no one else's to raise the child. I did everything in my power to persuade her of the value of her education. I warned her that she would struggle to make ends meet if, God forbid, something happened to me, and that she would need a degree to find a respectable job so she could care for herself and our child. She eventually consented to study once this started to sink in, but it was simply an online course that she could complete at home. All she needed to do was complete an exam at a testing facility. Our daughter turned 3 years old, and we discovered my wife was pregnant again. Since we were still under security, I couldn't figure out how this occurred. When I questioned her about it, she acknowledged that she occasionally forgot to take her medication on time. I wanted to be angry with her, but it didn't feel right to hold her solely responsible for the contraceptive burden when I wasn't being particularly cautious either. My income was comfortable and steady, so money wasn't a major concern. Our parents' initial financial assistance allowed us to save some savings over time and avoid taking on significant college debts. With baby number 2, it was all the same again. She would hardly leave the house. Her mother and I were the only people she truly allowed to be in her presence. Her sister occasionally as well. She hardly ever left the house, unless it was for our child's needs, an appointment, something like that, or an exam she had to take. She never seemed interested in talking about the problem of her extreme possessiveness, even when I tried to talk to her about it again. After the baby was born, she was the same as before, only allowing me or, very infrequently, her mother to be around her and the children. I told her she didn't have to shoulder so much of the burden alone when I noticed dark bags beneath her eyes. That when I go home, she could allow me to take at least 25% of it. She would not stop complaining about how other people handled situations, etc. After our second child, my wife was so tired and droopy by the time she went back to bed, even our sex life took a serious hit. She felt terrible leaving the kids to sleep alone in a different room, so on occasion she would even get them to share a bed with us. After reading an article about a baby who died as a result of co-sleeping, she stopped doing that and gave me a lengthy lecture to make sure I would never do it again. I really didn't intend to do that at all. Though by now I was in a dire situation, I eventually learned to give in and let her manage the kids however she pleased, whatever it was that she was up to. Since everything was done to ensure our kids' safety, I reasoned that it couldn't be too horrible. To her dismay, as our kids grew up, I made sure to always utilize protection when having sex, but I didn't give a damn at that time. With the kids growing older, Laura had been more composed, and I had no desire for things to return to the same with a new baby. Laura remained extremely involved and unduly wary about our kids. After our youngest child was old enough for preschool, she was able to find employment near our home, before leaving for work. She would drop them both off at school and pick them up when she got back. School buses travel our route. But every time I bring it up, she says it's not a good idea because of the statistics about bullying and school bus accidents. My wife nearly lost her cool when our eldest, who has a best friend, asked to spend the night at her house. My daughter sobbed all night, so I had to tuck her in and promise her lots of stories to help her fall asleep. She enjoys reading as a way to decompress. I had to persuade the parents of her closest friend to allow the sleepover to take place at our house instead. Now, when our youngest is 5 years old, my wife is expecting our third kid once more. One evening, she managed to persuade me. If you're a man reading this,